everyone, just a little teaser on the types of misinformation that we will be working to dismantle on our podcast, Misinformational. This week, the state of Florida finally decided to agree to drop charges against me related to a 2020 raid on my home. My home was quite famously raided at gunpoint. Guns were pointed at my small children, which police later lied about, saying that no weapons were drawn at any point, on the premise that someone had sent a text message to DOH employees telling them to speak out and be honest. They claimed that this was a hacking or some kind of cybersecurity charge for a website where the username and password was available in no fewer than 7 places online. It was a publicly accessible system. Someone sent a text message. We all know who the person who sent that text message was, and of course it wasn't me. So, a month later, when we filed a civil lawsuit against the police for the civil rights violations involved with the raid, including not having a warrant and rejecting my request to see one 4 times during 3 hours while they were at my house and waited on one. It arrived as they were walking out the door. I had no rights to dispute what they were and were not allowed to look for. I had no right to call a lawyer. I had no rights whatsoever. Neither did my children, who were 2 and 10 at the time, and were held at gunpoint and held hostage in our living room for 3 hours. Again, on the premise that someone sent a text to employees telling them to speak out and be honest. We sued the police. And the day after, Judge Cooper ruled in our initial hearing that the state of Florida cannot just order people to break into your home, steal your things, if they don't intend to prosecute you for any crime whatsoever, and they needed to either charge me or give me my stuff back. The police charged me the next day. They didn't charge me with sending a text message. What they charged me with was having a document on my OneDrive, which was beyond the scope of what they were supposed to look for, that had contact information for state employees who were working on the COVID-19 response. This is called a contact roster, and it was emailed me no fewer than 3 times during the COVID-19 pandemic, so it was on one of my drives. That made it much easier because public opinion was not in favor of raiding people without criminal records for sending text messages to coworkers. Now, not long after that, after I drove across the country to spend a night in jail and was sick with COVID-19 and tested positive there and had to go in isolation because they don't have the medical facilities to deal with COVID, the state offered to make a plea. The first plea offer was adjudication withheld. So that's essentially pleading no contest. I was refusing to do that. They wanted a year of probation and nothing else. I said no. So, sometime later, they come back. Now, they're offering to dismiss the case completely if I don't get in trouble for a year and follow some kind of boilerplate things like you can't do illegal drugs or be involved in criminal activity of any kind for a year, and a bit of community service, which is pretty typical. So, we were talking about whether or not to accept that when suddenly I was removed from the ballot of my primary election by a sham candidate who's never lived in the district she was running in. We won that on appeal, which was unexpected. And I won the primary after being on the ballot for only 1 day, the very last day of voting. Of course, in Florida, about 2/3 of people who are going to vote do so before Election Day. And we crushed it. The next day, the state made a different offer. And this time, it was absolutely insane. It included a host of terms that I would have never agreed to. It included an apology to the Department of Health. It included never working for, with, or in the state of Florida ever again. It included destroying evidence and data in my whistleblower case that the state had repeatedly lied and said I never had access to. It included dropping my whistleblower case, which had been filed 5 months before the raid on my house. The terms were absolutely outrageous, and in one of my more viral TikTok videos, this is what I said about that. And I told them to go fuck themselves. Right. So, they disappeared for a little while. After the election where I was running against Matt Gaetz, a few weeks later, the state comes back and decides that it's more agreeable to different terms now. There was still a lot to do with destroying evidence, and I said I was not willing to agree to that. So after a lot of back and forth, we came up with terms that we could agree upon. Then, and this is on the 2-year anniversary, December 7th, of the raid of my house, a month after the election, we received a notice that we've signed the wrong form, and there's a different form to be used. And the prosecutor had gone ahead and copy and pasted my signature from a previous version of the agreement and went ahead and put it on that one and wanted to know if that would raise any eyebrows. And she emailed this to my lawyer. So we looked at it and it was completely different. And I told my lawyer to instruct them that no, we wanted the agreement that we came to before, or we were going to trial. And she said, just strike whatever you don't like and we'll do it. So we worked with them to finally get rid of some of the other stuff they added in, ridiculous things like not having access to a gun, even though I've never owned a gun and I'm not accused of doing anything illegal with a gun. Other statements about drugs and alcohol, even though I've never even tried marijuana. Hello, yes, I'm a dweeb. And there were a lot of other contextual things there that we were like, no, this is completely unwarranted and we won't do it. So we struck those out one by one. The final agreement had, your usual, don't get arrested for a felony charge, don't do illegal activity, don't do drugs, don't be around people who do drugs, which is a little complicated. There were some other things that are kind of typical. I mean, I see a psychiatrist already, so I didn't have a problem with them requiring me to continue to do that. And so there was no point in contesting it. The two things that they would not budge on. The first was paying the police for the time that they spent raiding my home without a warrant and pointing guns at my children. This was something I was clearly very angry about after the primary when this was introduced for the first time. It was also something they weren't willing to budge on. So we changed it to be that I could either pay this lump sum of $20,000 right away and then just it ends, I don't have to do anything else. Or we could set it up to be $200 a month for 2 years, and then at the end of the 2-year period, the rest is forgiven. So was the most acceptable way that we could get it. It sucks. I'm not happy about it. I think it's extortion. I think it's an all too common practice. It's one of the reasons why rich people don't ever go to jail, and poor people do. Because if you can't pay the police a bribe, guess what? We'll take you to trial. And the other one was admitting that I had on my drive a copy of said roster, which I never denied because, again, it was sent to me at least 5 times during all of the responses that I worked before that and 3 times during COVID. This is not how, of course, the conservative news circuit interpreted this. There were a lot of false and misleading things, including a blatantly false, defamatory, and libelous statement by Matt Gaetz. And we'll be seeing him in a lawsuit very, very soon for multiple things that he said. So, to clear the air, there was no guilty plea. There's no plea of any kind because it's a dismissal. The case is being dropped. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is because, as I announced recently, I'm starting my PhD over this fall, and I am tired of feeling like I'm suffocating because I've got the state's knee on my back. And at any moment, for any reason, jaywalking or whatever excuse they want to have, they can just rearrest me and keep me indefinitely. And this has gone on for 2 years. So I could be in jail without a trial for 2 years for any reason. That's terrible for my family. They've been traumatized every step of the way by this whole thing since the moment that DeSantis outed me as the COVID whistleblower before I spoke to anyone publicly. Days before I spoke to anyone publicly, before I was even technically fired. Ever since that moment, my life has been this insane roller coaster. It's taken me to some amazing places. It's taken me to some very difficult ones too. My family has suffered. My kids, my son, has suffered because of this. Everyone knows now that DeSantis is a psychopath, but that wasn't common knowledge when he started this fixation and obsession with me. And I've become very disenfranchised with the media, having been inside the machine in both kind of this outsider perspective and then very much as an insider, being a regular commentator on every single news channel that ever invited me, which were hundreds, except for Fox News. They were never interested. And despite the multiple investigations that proved my whistleblower complaint was true, and the state itself releasing its determination about a month and a half before the election saying, yes, you engaged in protected whistleblower activity. Yes, you are still a protected whistleblower. Yes, what you reported was a violation of law that put in danger the health, safety, and welfare of the people of Florida. But because you were fired before you actually filed the complaint, you can't have been fired for filing it. I asked my boss on a Friday afternoon at the end of the day what the steps were to file a whistleblower complaint. He testified that he told me to think about my family and my career and the consequences of doing something like that, and advised against it. And then they fired me the next day before I could file it. We have until March to file our whistleblower suit, and we will not take that much time to do it. And the state of Florida, Governor DeSantis, won't have sway in that courtroom because we can force him to testify. He's inserted himself into this case repeatedly every step of the way. He took credit for the raid on my home gleefully in a press conference that he was doing just days afterwards. Said he knew about it, said he wasn't going to ignore it, that I was the darling of the fever swamps, and a whole bunch of other creepy and weird things. And this is just, I'm ready for this part to be over. And as far as what Matt Gaetz said, innocent people don't ask for pardons, but they do get their cases dismissed. Thanks, guys. See you Thursday.